Kris. I've been a member for longer than I care to think. Since 1982, on and off. And this were a bit of a request by a member because I do a bit of a presentation up at the observatory when we have rainy nights, and I do a presentation onto the inside of the dome, usually showing constellations, giving it from a general public point of view rather than overcomplicating matters. I'm just going to take one of those out because it sounds a bit strange. Rather than overcomplicating matters, it's how to identify the constellations, how to pick out which constellation is which, and just essentially I use a piece of software. I used to use Stellarium. I've since changed, and I'm going to try it with this technology. But because I'm doing this on a phone, I've not actually been able to try this with Zoom yet. So I'm really hoping it works. And I'm hoping I can get control of the screen and actually run this software and actually show you the sort of presentation I would give to the general public when we have one of our observatory nights. So I'll see if I can take control of the screen and do some sort of present. And I'm not seeing a present my screen option here, anybody?
Down at the bottom, share screen.
I've got it. It's share screen. It's just given me a warning. I've just got to go through some warnings up here on top. Right. Can everybody see my screen?
Not yet. You've actually frozen, Kris.
Have I?
Yes.
Right, let me go back. Let me go back into Zoom.
Okay, I can see your screen now.
Right. And what about now?
I've got a star chart, and I've got Draco, Hercules, Lyra.
Excellent. Excellent. Right. So, what the presentation I generally do is, I would get this up onto the wall at the observatory, and I would set the time to, well, if we imagine there's not much point actually doing live now, because if I was actually to go now, that is what we would get. So what I would generally do is it's a little ironic actually that I am presenting this on this particular evening, because as most astronomers will know, May the 14th is quite a sad evening for all us astronomers, because it's the last astronomical twilight is on May the 13th. Astronomical twilight is the point at which the sun no longer dips far enough below the horizon for us to get true darkness. So even though I'm actually presenting this now, we now have no true darkness until August. So it will not get dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to advance on to sunset. I'm going to let the sun set nicely. So you'll see the constellations starting to appear. And I'll take it to just after 11 o'clock tonight. And what I will do is I'll go full screen and I'll show you, essentially, I'll go through a little run through of what we've got in the sky. So one of the things to notice when you sort of get to this time of year, there's a few constellations that are prominent in the sky. One of these is Leo. Now, Leo is zoomed in now. You should all be able to see Leo now. And Leo is noticeable in the sky. It's not a particularly dominant constellation, but if you can see the little dot moving, there is an asterism called the sickle. And the sickle looks like a backwards question mark. And the sickle has a star called Regulus at the bottom of the question mark, forming the dot. Leo, as a constellation, it's a zodiacal constellation, so the sun passes through it, and its tail is called Denebola, But Leo as a constellation is quite a nice constellation to find others from. It's whereas a lot of the constellations in the summer sky or in this sort of time of the sky are essentially two stars together, which example Leo Minor there, which you can see above, which is essentially two stars. Leo has a noticeable shape, and we can use Leo as a pointer. And one of the interesting things we can do from Leo, if we look at the sickle of Leo, so it's this particular formation here. If we look at the sickle and we follow the ball of the backwards question mark and go back, we get to a rather insignificant constellation called Cancer, yet another zodiacal constellation. Now, Cancer is just 4 stars. It's not particularly special. It's heading back towards Gemini, and if you know Gemini is most notable by its bright 2 stars, Castor and Pollux, which form the heads of the twins. Now, here we have Pollux and Castor. Castor is a multiple system, so there are 6 stars making that up. But in between, for you binocular observers, because most of this, what I'm doing tonight, is it's not people using telescopes, it's people looking up at the sky and seeing what you can actually see with your naked eye, or a set of 20 by 50, 10 by 50 binoculars, which are what the average member of the public might have kicking around for doing a bit of bird watching. But as we zoom into Cancer, we see something quite nice in the middle of Cancer. Now, it doesn't show up until we get a bit closer in. And this is called Praesepe, or the beehive cluster. And it's in the middle of Cancer. It's a nice binocular object. It's just an open cluster of stars. It's nice golden and white stars. And it's an object you can quite easily see. You can actually get it just with the naked eye. If you get on a particularly dark site, you'll see that naked eye. But that is about halfway between Regulus, which is if you remember me saying, is the dot of the question mark of Leo, of the sickle, the backwards question mark. And it's about halfway between those and Castor and Pollux. So you've got a really nice object there that you can see. Now, as we carry on from Leo, we get back towards Leo again. So if you look at that, head back towards Leo, the next zodiacal constellation is Virgo. Now, Virgo is it's a particularly sprawling constellation. It's quite big. I believe it is actually the largest of all the zodiacal constellations by area. Notable stars, it's Spica, which is a magnitude 1 double star. It's also a variable, but it's not a particularly changing variable. And the constellation of Virgo has one particularly interesting feature about it, and unfortunately for the naked eye observer, it's not particularly great. However, it's nice to know that it's there. But in this area here, between Leo and Virgo, there's a constellation above called Coma, which is not a very noticeable constellation, 3 very dim stars. However, in this area here, we have essentially a galactic supercluster. And flitting over that area of the sky with a telescope will yield many, many fuzzy little blobs. And as we zoom in, you'll see the sky is absolutely littered with galaxies, including, there's a rather nice one, it's called Macarian's Chain. It's actually a chain of galaxies, and you can hop, in a telescope, you can hop down the chain of galaxies. And none of them are particularly bright, but it's an easy, that once you've found them, particularly the lower ones in the sky tend to be, these here, we've got M86 and M84 are quite easy to pick up on. And then as you get to the NGC numbers, they're easy to find from these two. Those two there, we're talking magnitude 9, I believe, on that one. But it's an interesting area to know that it's there. However, with a set of binoculars, you're very unlikely to see anything in this area here. However, it is nice to know that there is a supercluster there. Now, as we head up from Virgo, so remember the shape of Virgo, remember the shape of Leo with its backwards question mark and its sickle, and the tail of it, the tail of Leo, the star Den of Olive, we head into 2 constellations, neither of which seem particularly spectacular. However, this star here, Corcoroli, is quite an interesting star because it's variable, and it's not quite as variable as Algol is, but it's actually quite a nice variable star, Carcarole. That's so not a particularly great area of constellations. That it's not great sky, but up from Virgo, we get an incredibly noticeable constellation with an incredibly bright star. That's Arcturus. That is the brightest star in the northern sky. And the constellation of Bootes or Boetes is particularly noticeable. However, there is probably, and most of our members will probably know, there is actually an easier way to find that star than hopping around from Virgo. And the easier way, if we zoom out a little bit, up at the zenith at the moment, we have one of the most striking constellations in the sky. Now, as a constellation as its whole, it's good, it's interesting, but the bit that everybody knows is this here, the Plough. The Plough is an incredibly noticeable, and at the moment, at this time of year, at about 11 o'clock, it will be bang overhead. And the Plough is one of the great navigators of the sky. It's your great summer navigator, and it lets you find so many things that one little constellation. So if you follow the handle of the Plough, form a curve, that's your best way of finding Arcturus, and it's smack straight onto Arcturus. Arcturus, of course, as I've just said, is the brightest star in the sky. There is a rather nice little globular cluster there, M3, which is in Canes Venetici or Venetici, which is under, it's sort of to the right of Arcturus. It's quite an easy one to fall onto, that one. Binoculars should see that one quite well as well. But using the Plough again as our little wonderful pointer, one of the commonest things that you can tell amateur astronomers is how to find Polaris from the Plough, because these two stars here, Merak and Jubei, so we have Jubei and Merak, we follow a line along there, it's about 5 times the distance, and we fall straight onto Polaris, the pole star. So if you can find the Plough, if you can see the Plough and see the pointer stars, you've got Polaris. We've also, from the Plough, we've got a diagonal across here, across the bowl of the Plough. And if we follow those two stars, which is the one I can never pronounce, and Dubé, we get various names for this, but M81, M82, it's the same distance copied across the bowl. M81 and M82, sometimes known as Bode's Nebula or Bode's Galaxies. And that is a fantastic spiral galaxy and an irregular galaxy. Very, very easy objects to find in a small scope. Fuzzy blobs in a small scope, you can start to make out some detail in a bigger scope. Now, of course, we've got the Plough, and what's across the pole from the Plough? Well, there's another particularly striking constellation that we can find. So if we head straight across the pole, straight around the pole, I'm just going to have to find this because my view's going to want to flip around here. We get, it's not going to let me do that easily. I'm going to have to scroll across. Right, here we go. Got to it. We get the famous W of Cassiopeia. Now, I'm hoping most people can identify Cassiopeia, the W symbol in the sky. That's another particularly great constellation because it's obvious. You can point it out easily to the general public, and they remember it. They will see it. Now, unfortunately, at this time of year, Cassiopeia sits opposite the pole to the Plough. So when the Plough's high, Cassiopeia's low, and Cassiopeia at the moment is quite low to the horizon. But one object you can get, and you can still get at this time of year, just underneath the W of Cassiopeia, we have H and Chi Persei, which is just there, which is a pair of open clusters. Quite interesting to see. Some very mixed coloured stars in those. Some very nice object to see, and another easy binocular object. Now, Cassiopeia itself is another good pointer constellation because if you imagine Cassiopeia forming a W, well, from the W of Cassiopeia, if we take these second two stars here, those second two stars point straight down into the body of Perseus, and they lead us straight to Murphach, which is Alpha Persei. So Cassiopeia is very much linked to Perseus, and if you read into your mythology much, you will also realise that Cassiopeia and Perseus were linked also in the various mythologies. So how apt that they were put together in the sky. Now, unfortunately, just above Cassiopeia, or just above to the left of Cassiopeia, is one of the most insignificant and yet large constellations you can possibly imagine, Camelopardalis. And I'll also give Lynx a notable mention, because constellation of Camelopardalis, which is the giraffe, and the constellation of Lynx, which is the lynx, are both incredible. They take up a very large section of the sky, have very few bright stars, and Lynx itself is so named because has often been thought to be so named because only the lynx-eyed can see it. It's an incredibly poor constellation, but you will also notice that we're now getting back towards Gemini. So we've come round in a bit of a full circle, and we've got back to the zodiac. Now, underneath Lynx and to the side of Perseus, we get a constellation of Capella. Capella the house, as I often describe it, because the constellation does, even though it's Auriga the house, or the charioteer, which is the planet Venus is just dipping in below Auriga at the moment. It actually passes into Auriga, I believe, very rarely for a brief amount of time. But this star here is actually shared with Taurus. So even though you get the house shape, it's you've actually got a borrowed star. But we're not here to look at the constellations that are currently down, because we're here to navigate the constellations that are currently visible and up. So we're now coming into summer, and one of the most fantastic things we have coming into summer is just here, and it's just starting to rise, and this is going to dominate our sky all the way through the summer. It's called the Summer Triangle, and it's made up of three fantastically bright stars. We have Altair in the constellation of Aquila, we have Vega in the constellation of Lyra, and we have Deneb in the constellation of Cygnus. And those three are absolutely the most amazing markers you can possibly imagine. And Cygnus in particular is a very bright constellation. It's a giant cross. It sits across the Milky Way. So you've got the Milky Way running down the screen here, running from left to right. You've got the amazing brightness of the Milky Way, which, if you get a dark enough night and clear enough night, which at the moment, with the lack of pollution because of the COVID-19, we are getting some very spectacular skies. The Milky Way is visible, and flying along the Milky Way is Cygnus the Swan. Cygnus the Swan being a particularly amazing constellation. It's very bright stars. Anyone with a set of binoculars, go to the tail of the cross, go to the Star of Albireo, and you will pick up an incredibly gorgeous. We have arguments about the colours. I always say blue and gold, or turquoise and gold, but we have a beautiful double star, one of the most beautiful double stars in the sky. Incredible contrast in those two as well. Of course, Cygnus itself, for the astrophotographers out there, they will know that it is absolutely full of nebulosity. If you take a long exposure photo of Cygnus, you will get traces of pink. Particularly, we have the North American Nebula, which sits off Deneb in the constellation. North American Nebula, obviously, because named because it resembles North America. I have some people describe it various ways. Some people say that that shape there resembles the entirety of North America and Canada, and that's Hudson Bay. And some people say that that's Mexico. This is the North America, and that's Florida. So we have the North American Nebula, as I say. For some reason, this is the Pelican there. next to the North America. Not quite as bright or as obvious as the North America Nebula, but still a rather good object. So flying along the Milky Way, like I say, constellation of Cygnus, it's the cross here. It's quite noticeable. And above Cygnus, we have a little tiny constellation and yet an incredibly striking constellation called Lyra, the Lyre. Now, Lyra has a very, very bright star in it. And Vega, very noticeable, very bright. You get a pattern repeated down the constellation, and between the two bottom ones, the two bottom stars of the constellation, we get the Ring Nebula, which in powerful binoculars is like a little wispy smoke ring. Not so powerful binoculars, you can just see it, but it's an incredibly tiny object. So when you are looking at it, just bear in mind it is very, very tiny as an object. It's very difficult to fall upon, but when you do fall upon it, it is absolutely, it just looks like somebody's blown a smoke ring into the heavens. Now, also, the constellation Cygnus has another couple of other interesting little constellations around it. We have Vulpecula the Fox, which whilst itself doesn't stick out, and Sagitta the Arrow, which is just beneath there. The constellation of Sagitta the Arrow is notable because it is essentially an arrow, but around there we have a couple of little objects. We have the Dumbbell Nebula, which is another nice little binocular object. You'll get that in fairly powerful binoculars, and it looks something like somebody's took a bite out of an apple. Now, for those of you who don't know, a planetary nebula, which is the same as I've just shown with the Ring Nebula, is essentially a star that has decided once it reaches its end stage of life, it just blows off its outer layers, puffs off its outer layers, and creates a smoke ring. It looks like a smoke ring to us, but it's actually a sphere. And what we're doing is we're looking through the front of the sphere. Imagine a hollow sphere. The walls are thicker than the front and back, so we're seeing through the sphere. So the Dumbbell Nebula there is a particularly nice little object, and there's another little tiny thing here, which is I'm not sure whether it will show up on my software because I've had to, so you can see the stars. I've had to turn the star detail down. It may not show up. Oh, unfortunately not. There is actually a small asterism around here called Conda 399, which is called the coat hanger. Oh, it's there. It is there. There you go. It's called the coat hanger cluster. You see, it looks like a coat hanger. That's a summer cluster of constellations. It's a great little, great set of constellations. Those Cygnus, Vega, Cygnus, Lyra, sorry, and down. We can't see Altair at the moment. What I will do is I will spin on a little bit later, and we'll see Altair rise. Well, right. So we've got the constellations that I've just been covering, the summer constellations, which they will be absolutely slap bang high in the sky. Now, as we head up towards the pole, we get Draco, which the box of Draco is quite notable. It's above the summer triangle. You'll see a box, and something quite interesting about the box of Draco is that the pole actually will eventually pass through the box of Draco, and the star Thuban, which is that I believe is one of these here, is our next pole star. I've got to remember which one it is now. But the pole as it goes through Draco, actually, it's there. That's our next pole star, the star Thuban, just for interest. But the pole makes quite a big circle in the sky as the Earth rotates. But that's for another talk. So
it's not anytime soon, is it, Kris?
It's not anytime soon. It's not next week. Let's put it that way. Okay. I think we're quite a few thousand years away from that. Now, another constellation that I've sort of skipped around because I'll cover it. I'm going to cover it because I'm going to now go down a strip of the sky. But as we head up from the summer triangle, we get the constellation of Hercules. Hercules, the plant pot. Now, we have Bootes here, which is the constellation I mentioned earlier with the incredibly bright star Arcturus. And then we have Hercules, which is a slightly less bright constellation. However, you binocular observers, as you look at Hercules, you'll see a plant pot shape in the sky, and on the right-hand side of the plant pot, the Hercules cluster, or as we would know it in this country, because this is American software, M13, is one of the finest planetary, finest globular clusters in the sky. It's incredibly bright, incredibly easy to see, borderline naked eye, and very easy in binoculars. You should fall straight onto that one. If you take the two right-hand stars of the plant pot and sort of head up the right-hand side from the bottom star, it's about 2/3 of the way up, or third of the way down from the upper star. It's very easy to find, very easy object. And just above Hercules, not an incredibly bright constellation, but one I should always mention, Corona Borealis, the Northern Crown, our society's logo constellation. And the brightest star is called Alphecca or Gemma. It's got two names. It's Alphecca is also a variable star, but it's quite a distinctive crown-shaped constellation. You can tell it wants to be a crown, and it's quite easy to spot as well as a constellation. Now, underneath there, we have the incredibly sprawling Serpens. Serpens is quite special as a constellation. I'm going to zoom the time on a little bit now so I can show this a bit better. I'm going to whiz time on a bit, and I'm going to take us till about 2 o'clock in the morning. And at just after 2 o'clock in the morning, we have our entire southern sky pretty much dominated by a large constellation called Ophiuchus. Now, Ophiuchus and the constellations of Serpens are quite special because Serpens as a constellation is two constellations, really, because we have Serpens Cauda and Serpens Caput. So that is split into two constellations. And if you want me to show you that, demonstrate that, if I just go to this, we can go to show the boundaries, and you can see there that we have the boundary of Serpens there, and then we have another section of Serpens just here. And that is, so it's a split constellation. I'll turn those back off again. Now, as we get to Ophiuchus, that is a summer constellation. The sun is in that area of the sky in summer, so we are obviously, at the moment, we're going to start losing that soon. But underneath it, to the south of it, in pretty much due south at 2 a.m., you have a phenomenally red star, Antares. There you go. 605 light years away, that star, and it's beautifully red, very noticeable. Unfortunately for us, this area here is the galactic centre, and unfortunately for us, the galactic centre is in the pretty much in the southern hemisphere of the sky, so it means that we don't actually ever get a very good view of the galactic centre. But we have some incredibly good nebulae. So we have the Eagle Nebula, M21, the Lagoon Nebula, all those objects, all in a pretty small amount of space. But unfortunately, we don't get them for very long, and when we do get them, it's the middle of summer. So it's not great observing for us. You will also notice over here, just rising in the southeast, we actually have a bit of a cluster of planets. So that's in particular why I chose this time. We've got Jupiter. And one of the little features of this software which I can show you is if we go to Jupiter, we highlight Jupiter, we get the information for it. We can actually fly out and orbit it. So we can actually jump to objects in the solar system. So we can orbit Jupiter and see the layout of Jupiter as it is. And then we can just go back home. So anybody who's thinking, what does this software actually do that's very, very good? That's a particularly interesting feature. And we can do the same for most things with it. We can actually do the same things for the planets, but one of the other things we can do it for if I find something particularly nearby, which I will just find for us. If I go to, for example, Dubé, and pick a star, pick the star Dubé, go to object info. It's about 120 light years away, Dubé. We can actually whiz over to the star. And you can see the double nature of the star. And you can actually see what the sky would look like. And if you look at the sun there, look, we have the tiny little insignificant speck of the sun. So that's a great little feature of this software, is that you can fly to other systems and you can actually have a look at the systems. It doesn't do the planets yet, though, for you, for all you protoplanet and neoplanet spotters. It doesn't do all those yet, but it does do the stars. And you can also, just as a final little note, which doesn't work quite as well as expected, but you can actually go to something like a globular cluster, which is outside our own Milky Way. And you will see our own Milky Way fly away and turn into a disk. But that's a bit of a lackluster interpretation as it is at the moment, but it does show that the rendition of space is actually a good 3D rendition. So back to the constellations. So we've got Hercules. Ophiuchus is very large. It's some people refer to Ophiuchus. It's because the constellation itself isn't a great constellation, but because it's on the galactic center, it's very noticeable. It's also got some very good globular clusters in Ophiuchus. You get 3 quite close together, 4 if you count M107, which isn't quite as good. But you've got M14, M10, and M12, all of which are fairly easy binocular objects. M107, not quite such a binocular object. It's a little bit fainter. M107 is a little more sparsely populated as well than the other 3. And as we go into the galactic centre, obviously, you get all the nebulosity. Now, I'm not going to recommend you look at nebulae with binoculars because it's not the perfect, unless you get a very bright nebula, it's not a very good thing to look at with binoculars. But as we trek up the Milky Way, we get Scutum, which is quite famous because it's got quite a bright star cloud. It's got quite a bright area of the Milky Way. And then back up to Aquila the Eagle with its star of Altair, which, because we're now later on, as you'll see, the summer triangle is now absolutely dominating the sky. Incredibly bright, sat straight over the Milky Way as well, so you've got a really good view of the Milky Way. And you'll also notice that we're also starting to get Pegasus rising. Now, I'm going to advance the timer a little bit more. I can't go on much further because, as you'll notice here, the sun is starting to rise again. And as I mentioned, this time of year, the sun never goes far enough below the horizon for it to get truly dark. So what we have to do is we have to observe when we can, but you will see, as it gets towards midsummer, you'll see that the sun never truly sets and we get a glow just passes across the northern sky, and as we get towards sunrise again in the northeast, so the sun will rise over here and it never gets far enough below the horizon for it to get truly dark. But I'll advance time a little more and I'll bring Pegasus up. And as you'll notice already, it's getting a little late. I'll just go back a little bit. You see the stars are now disappearing because the time is actually catching up with us. But Pegasus itself is an incredibly notable constellation because you have a big box of nothingness. And the box of Pegasus is quite obvious in the sky. There's very little inside it. That star is not as noticeable as it is on the software because I've had to make it visible to all you on the internet, and using the streaming format, I've had to make the stars a lot bigger and reduce their numbers. But the nice thing with Pegasus is we have quite a few interesting objects in Pegasus. Now, we have another nice little globular cluster, which is off the, if you follow the head of Pegasus, because Pegasus is upside down in the sky at this time, and follow the head of Pegasus, you get a golden star called Enif or Enif, And just off the star of Enif, follow those two lines of the head, stars of the head. You get a lovely globular cluster, M15, which I think is the second best behind M13, the globular cluster in Hercules. It's quite a nice tight cluster, that one, quite dense. I believe we do have an image in the software as well. So there you go. It's quite a nice little cluster, that one. The box of Pegasus itself isn't that noticeable. There's not a lot in it. There is, if I can remember exactly where it is, because I always forget where it is. There is actually I may have to use the search function here and cheat, because I can never remember exactly where it is. There is actually a cluster of galaxies called Stephan's Quintet. You know, it's not going to let me click the bit of the box, unfortunately. I think it's up near Shaft. Anyway, it's not a particularly visible object. The one we're going to is here. So we get the box of Pegasus, and on the box of Pegasus, we get Andromeda coming off. Now that star there, Alpheratz, isn't actually in Pegasus. It's another one of these weird stars that's shared between two constellations, but it's actually in Andromeda. And because it's in Andromeda, it makes it Alpha Andromeda, because it's the brightest star in Andromeda, even though if it was in Pegasus, it would be the brightest star in Pegasus. So lucky Andromeda got its alpha star stole its alpha star from Pegasus, and Pegasus doesn't actually now have an alpha star. And if we move across the arm, or across the body of Andromeda, we get a line of stars, and the golden one, everybody always describes it as the golden star. If we hop up and up again, we get the Andromeda Galaxy, which is an absolute fall-on for a pair of binoculars. Absolutely amazing galaxy, and this thing is about 4 times the width of the full moon. So if you imagine a full moon taking up that sort of space in the sky, as I'm drawing with the circle now, that is an incredibly big object. And in a telescope, it's bigger than a field of view. It's not a great telescope object because telescopes are just too powerful for it. It's got its 2 little companion galaxies as well. One there, M32, and then the one that's further away. M32 sits outside the disk in binoculars. The disk in binoculars, you see this middle area only. And then we get M110, which is a little elliptical galaxy. And that is a phenomenally good object. It's the finest galaxy in the sky. And one other note of note that always gets overshadowed because we have M32, the Andromeda Galaxy, so nearby, is this little thing down here, which is, sorry, which is not, where is it gone? There, clicking the wrong one, which is the Pinwheel Galaxy. An absolutely lovely little galaxy, Messier 33, and it's quite a big galaxy. It's quite big and open, and not easy to spot. But the really nice thing about the Pinwheel Galaxy is it's actually got, if it'll show me, it's got a pattern of stars that surround it that sort of make it, I get the positioning right, there's a pattern of stars. There's one there that doesn't seem to be appearing at the moment on the software, but it's got a parallelogram of stars around it that sits around it. It's quite easy to spot because of that. But again, another binocular object, but that you would probably need 20 B80s for. You wouldn't be getting that in a pair of 10 B50s. And so as we get on further on and we sort of go on through time, we'll notice we're now starting to get the sun rising. The stars start disappearing.
Kris, there's been a query about whether you can turn the sky off.
Can I turn this? Yeah, I can turn the sky off, yes. I can. It is you're basically wanting the
Can you turn the atmosphere off?
Like that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. It was just a query about the software, not to do it in your presentation.
All right. Yeah. But yes, you can. You can go for that sort of view. So you've got, even though we've now got the the sun coming up. You've got the,
Yeah.
you can still see all the constellations.
Yeah. Okay.
So yes, that is doable. But this is the way I do it. This is the way I would do it at a presentation, because what we do is we go through a night and show them. So as you see, the sun's now rising. We're losing all the beauty. However, one thing that is still visible and was visible quite well this morning is the moon and Venus on an evening as well. And the moon is looking quite spectacular in the morning at the moment. We've got for anybody who is following it, we are currently in the Muslim month of Ramadan. So we're watching this moon, and as that moon disappears and heads towards a new moon, the first crescent being sighted at Mecca indicates the end of Ramadan, which is the celebration of Eid. So anyone who's a follower of the Islamic religion at the moment will be watching that thing get smaller and smaller. But I saw it this morning, looking absolutely beautiful, the moon. And of course, that is another thing that you can mention to the general public if you're doing a talk, because the number of people who don't realise you can see the moon in daylight, even though it's there all the time. The number of, you just mentioned to the general public that there's, oh, have you seen the moon in the day? Have you seen the moon in the morning? And they go, no, the moon comes out at night. So explaining the moon is quite an interesting one to the general public. And of course, just above the moon is Mars as well, which is now, it's going to start dominating our sky very soon, is Mars. We've got Mars for the later summer. So that is as I would generally do it, which if I've timed it right, should take about 45 minutes. And I think, yes, I've timed it right. And that is the way I usually do it at the ob. So obviously I've gone into a little more detail for you guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Jump to my video. So yeah, that is how I would do it at the ob. I've gone into a little more detail for you guys, assuming a little prior knowledge.
Well, thank you very much. Are you going to take questions now?
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask any questions, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so usual way, if you've got a question, put your hand up. And Phil.
Right, sorry, no, I was just adjusting my screen, I'm all right.
Anybody else got a question, if you put your hand up? Lewis? Oh, Mike.
Is that Safari software free?
No, I've got the Pro version. There's the Sky Safari normal is about £6. The Pro version's about 18. It can control a telescope though. It's got features to control quite a lot of different telescopes.
Right, thanks.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Anybody else got a question? Nobody.
I've either answered all the questions or they're all asleep.
Oh, hold on. Phil's got a question.
It's not a question really, but more of a comment, Chris. I know you said the features is a bit dull, but it is from here. Last year I went to Greece, and as we were cruising across the Aegean, I went up on deck about 12 o'clock at night, and the features was quite high in end of May.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I'm not joking, Chris, with Scorpius, Sagittarius and Ophiuchus, it was absolutely stunning. Because it's higher in the sky and you see more of the Milky Way, it was spectacular. It took my breath away.
As you get to Southern Europe, I've seen it from Cyprus as well, and the tail of Scorpius is absolutely fantastic to see, because we never get this tail of Scorpius rise in the UK.
Yeah, I took my small binoculars and had a look, me 8 by 30s, and I had a look at some of the globulars around Scutum and Sagittarius and Ophiuchus. They were superb. There's so much more you can see you can't see from here.
Oh,
it must have been absolutely spectacular. But like you said, it's not very good from here.
If you get to Cyprus as well, you start getting things like the top of Centaurus dipping up as well.
Yeah.
You get Omega Centauri. You don't quite get Alpha.
Yeah. Just a quick story about Ophiuchus. Apparently they did a statue of it on Lindos. In Rhodes?
Yeah.
Apparently the Romans nicked it and it ended up in Rome, and it's now in the Vatican, I believe. And the statue, it's in white marble, and it's supposed to be Ophiuchus. that the Greeks carved, and the carving's quite spectacular as well.
Mm.
So
That's
the
what happens
Catholics
when
have got it now.
Yeah, that's what happens when you've got two popes at the same time. Thanks, Phil. Andy Devey, welcome, Andy.
Yeah, just to let you know, we're at 37 degrees north, so it's quite high from here, and we don't have a problem with astronomical twilight.
No, you're lucky for that. You'll
Yeah, we just get naked looking up at it.
you never actually lose it there, do you?
No.
You never actually lose night there.
So why don't we see lots of nice pictures of Macarian's chain from you guys?
Yeah, we lose it. We lost it today.
I've got a picture of Macarian's chain, Paul.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. I'll send it to Roy for next week.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
That's the picture competition for next week then. Pictures of Macarian's chain.
Thank you, Andy. Anybody got any other questions? Nothing. So
nothing at all.
Just hang on, Paul.
Oh, go on then.
Just to back up what Kris is saying, for the non-astronomers on the call, which is probably most of us, a pair of 10 by 50s or a 7 by 50s are really nice instruments to explore a lot of the objects that Kris has spoke about. So you don't have to rush out and buy a telescope. You can start with a pair of binoculars, and there's a lot to see.
That is the aim of when I do the talks up at the Ob, when I do the constellation talks. That is the aim I always go for. Is you don't need a big telescope to see these. You can get these in a cheap pair of binoculars, and it's surprising how cheap a pair of binoculars you can get and still see a lot of these objects. You don't need to spend thousands on them. A pair of 30 quid Jessop's binoculars see me right for quite a lot of stuff. And they're not expensive. I know Jessop's are a bit of a weird one. Do they actually exist at the moment, Jessop's?
I'm not too sure. Well, I don't think they're open. Because places like Meadowhall and things are closed down. Look, another good place, a bit pricier, but helping people out. Go and have a look at RSPB shops.
Their binoculars are very good because they have decent brands.
Yeah. So, can we thank Kris in our usual manner? Just have a wave at the screen and whatever. Just say thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.